Part 24. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 232. Tang Ning had thought about meeting Miss Tang's family more than once. After all, the soul in his body is from another world. The meeting will probably be very awkward. Facing an unfamiliar face, he can't say the word mother. But the person standing opposite him now was no stranger. Even if his mother died unexpectedly when he was a child, he did not dare and could not forget the face that should have been remembered for his whole life. After being able to look through the memory, the figure became clearer. Of course, memories are just memories after all, and they are far less impactful than when the figure in his memory stood in front of him. He thought about thousands of possibilities, but never thought that his mother in this world would look exactly like his deceased mother, including the mole of tears at the corner of her left eye. So the first time he saw her, he shouted "Mom" uncontrollably. His mind was blank at the moment, and all the psychological preparations he had made before coming collapsed at the Ning just now. He knew that it was impossible to see his mother in another world, but facing this one that could affect her, his face, which had been hidden in his heart for 20 years, still found it difficult to remain calm. He was holding onto the table with one hand to barely stay standing. The kingly woman looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, and she choked with sobs. "Ning, my mother is sorry for you." Tang Ning lowered his head, not daring to look at her anymore, but the familiar voice coming from the depths of his soul still made his body tremble. He raised his hand and slapped himself hard. When he looked up again, the familiar face remained unchanged. "Ning, Mrs. Kingly grabbed his hand in a panic and looked at him with a worried look. "It's okay." Tang Ning took a deep breath, her voice a little hoarse, and she loosened her grip on the corner of the table. A look of relief appeared on her face, as if she had put down something, but she stood straighter. She looked into the eyes of the person opposite her, and the kingly woman also looked at him. There was a trace of nervousness in her eyes, but more of expectation. Tang Ning suddenly stretched out his arms, hugged her tightly, and whispered, "Mom." The body in his arms was shaking slightly, and there were 2 traces of tears on his face, but his eyes were full of smiles, and his absent-minded eyes were filled with unprecedented brilliance. Outside the small courtyard, Tang Shui lowered his head and kept pacing at the entrance of the courtyard. Princess Anyang looked at her helplessly and said, "Can't you just sit quietly for a while?" Tang Shui looked into the courtyard, thought for a long time, walked into the courtyard, and after a moment, turned around and walked out. Princess Anyang sighed and said, "If you want to go in, just go in and take a look. You are a family anyway, so what's the point?" Tang Shui looked into the courtyard and said, "It's almost time. If we don't go back, they will become suspicious." As soon as she finished speaking, a figure walked out of the courtyard. Tang Ning supported the pretty woman and said softly as she walked through the steps, "There are steps, so be careful." Tang Shui looked at this scene, and after being stunned for a moment, joy quickly appeared on his face. Mrs. Kingly held Tang Ning's hand and said with some reluctance, "It's very late. You should go back quickly. Be careful on the road." Tang Ning smiled and said, "I understand, Mom." Tang Shui looked at him, and the tight string in his heart finally relaxed. Tang Ning stood there, watching them leave, and then walked out of the back door under the leadership of Princess Anyang. "Congratulations to the champion mother and son for meeting each other." Princess Anyang sent him out and then said, "Shui can finally breathe a sigh of relief." Tang Ning slightly cupped her hands and said, "Thank you, Princess." "No need to thank me." Princess Anyang waved her hand and said, "I just didn't want Shui to be so tired." Fortunately, the #1 scholar did not let her down. Tang Ning smiled politely and said, "Princess, please go back quickly." Tang Ning takes her leave. Princess Anyang nodded, turned around and walked back. Tang Ning didn't walk back alone until the back door of the princess mansion was closed. Although the curfew time was coming soon, Tang Mansion was just a street away, so he could just walk back slowly. There were footsteps behind her. Tang Ning turned around and saw Tang Shui walking out of the princess's mansion again. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Why didn't you go back?" "Sister-in-law, let's go back first." "I'll take you back." Tang Shui put his hands behind his back, walked briskly, and hummed an unknown tune. He was obviously in a good mood. Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I don't have a few steps to go, and the curfew is coming soon. You can go back early, there is no need to send me off." Tang Shui walked up to him and said, "No matter how big or small, there is no such thing as you or you, I am your sister." Tang Ning smiled and said, "Miss Tang, stop making trouble. He is very lucky and happy to meet the person he most wants to see in this strange world. They have the same appearance, the same voice, and the same constant connection, no matter what parallel universe this is. Or fate or something," he had already decided in his heart. But he didn't want to have an extra sister out of nowhere. Although she was kind, gentle, and very kind to him, Tang Ning would occasionally think about it. It would be a very happy thing to have such a sister, but just thinking about it. "I'm not making trouble." Tang Shui looked at him and said seriously, "Whether you admit it or not, I am still your sister." Tang Ning turned her head and said nonchalantly, "Then I don't admit it." As soon as he finished speaking, a slender hand touched his ear. Tang Shui used a little force on his hand and said, "Whether you admit it or not, I have been your sister since you were born. If you continue to be so ignorant, no kidding, don't blame me for teaching you a lesson for my sister-in-law." The gentle and intellectual elder sister suddenly turned into a savage and willful witch. Tang Ning couldn't accept the contrast for a while, so she grabbed her hand and said hurriedly, "Let go." Tang Shui asked, "Do you admit that I am your sister?" Tang Ning gritted her teeth and said, "I don't admit it." Tang Shui twisted his hand at an angle again and asked, "Do you admit it or not?" "Deny." "Do you admit it or not?" "Sister. A good man doesn't suffer the consequences." Tang Ning rubbed her ears and finally understood what Xiaoju meant by witch. It turns out that her previous gentleness, generousness, and gentleness were all just an act. This is the true nature of a witch. Tang Shui showed a smile on his face, let go of his hand, gently rubbed his ears, and said softly, "Does it hurt?" "It doesn't hurt anymore, it doesn't hurt anymore." After what happened just now, Tang Ning panicked when she heard her pretending to be gentle. She hurriedly took her hand away, took 2 steps forward, and distanced herself from her. "Just be obedient." Tang Shui walked to his side again and said, "If you encounter any difficulties in the future, just tell me that I am your sister and I will help you." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "I'm short of money." Tang Shui took out a stack of banknotes from his sleeve and handed it to him, saying, "There should be more than 5,000 taels here. Keep the rest at home. If it's not enough, I'll have someone deliver it to you tomorrow." Tang Ning suddenly felt that having a sister was not a bad thing, especially a generous sister. He did not pick up the banknotes and said, "I'm just kidding, you'd better put these banknotes away quickly." Tang Shui put the banknotes away and said, "I will find a way for you to meet again." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I will figure out a solution for this matter myself." Tang Shui frowned and looked at him and said, "Don't show off." Tang Ning looked forward and said calmly, "Don't worry." He crossed time and space, died once, and finally had the chance to see that face again. How could he give up so easily? The Tang family was a prison, and he would have to take her out of that place sooner or later. If she couldn't be honest, she would have to steal her out. Although Tang Shui pulled his ear, but seeing that she was kind-hearted and treated him well, he could consider stealing her out together when the time comes. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 233. Remember 3Q Chinese website in 1 second, read wonderful novels for free without pop-ups. Tang family, back house. While eating melon seeds, Tang Yaoyao looked at Zhongyi and Su Ryu and said, "Do you feel that something is not right with him these past 2 days?" Zhongyi thought for a moment and said, "My husband seems to have had something happy these past 2 days." Su Ryu nodded and said, "Brother Xiaoning has smiled more in the past 2 days. Maybe it's because I'm getting married to you soon." Tang Yaoyao held her chin with one hand. Although she said so, she always felt that it wasn't because of this. Thinking about it carefully, he met Li Tianlan the day before yesterday, and went to Su Mei's place yesterday to send invitations. Especially yesterday, it took him 2 hours to send the invitations. 2 hours was enough to get some sleep. Tang Ning was sitting in the pavilion, thinking about something, when Tang Yaoyao walked in from outside the pavilion and sat opposite him. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Is something wrong?" Tang Yaoyao thought for a while and said, "I ask you a question, and you have to answer it truthfully." Tang Ning thought for a while and felt that she had nothing to hide from her. She looked at her and said, "Just tell her." Tang Yaoyao looked at him and said, "Who do you think is more beautiful, Li Tianlan or Su Mei?" Tang Ning looked her up and down and asked, "Don't you want to be included in the options?" Tang Yaoyao's face turned red and she whispered, "Then, what about me?" Su Mei. Tang Ning replied honestly. As a friend, he didn't want to deceive Tang Yaoji. Su Hu was recognized as the most beautiful woman in the capital. She pretended to be charming, and it was easy for a man to lose control of her. Although the three of them each have their own merits in terms of appearance alone, from a man's perspective, Su Mei wins without any suspense. The expression on Tang Yaoyao's face froze for a while, then she looked at Tang Ning and said with a smile, "I also think Su Mei is pretty." Snapped. She broke off a piece of the porcelain cup that Tang Ning had placed on the table. Tang Ning looked at the fragments in her hand, couldn't help but swallowed, and said, "Don't take it seriously, I was just joking." Tang Yaoyao put the broken piece back together, gritted his teeth and said, "I was just kidding too." There is a price to pay for being skinny, and the price for Tang Ning's skinship is that Tang Yaoyao ignores him. "I've finished writing The Palace of Eternal Life. You can see what's wrong with it and I'll make some changes. What do you think we should write next about the legend of the White Snake or the Lotus Lantern or Yang Erlang cutting the mountain to save his mother? Speak. If you don't speak, I will take it as your acquiescence. From now on, I will take 70% of the profit from the bookstore and 30% of it will be yours." No matter how Tang Ning talked to her, she ignored him and gave him a blank stare at most. Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Actually, you look pretty good when you roll your eyes. You're prettier than Su Mei." He responded with a second eye roll. "Hey, forget it if you don't want to talk to me." Tang Yaoyao shook his head and said with some regret, "When I went to Taiyuan Hospital to sort out medical books today, I found a set of massage techniques. I originally wanted to give it to you. Since you don't want it, I'll give it to Qing-er. Qing-er has long thought that her figure is not plump enough. Full." Tang Yaoyao turned around suddenly and said loudly, "Come back." Although she was very busy these days, Tang Ning still took the time to go to the hospital. Before the provincial examination, he had promised the imperial doctor that after the imperial examination, he would help the imperial hospital to check the medical books. The medical classics of the imperial hospital were naturally not comparable to those outside. Some of the secret recipes and secret techniques in them were from the royal family. Collection has been exemplified by countless people. Tang Ning discovered a set of massage methods from medical books. It was tailor-made for Tang Yaoyao. She didn't know how effective it would be, but she didn't need to take medicine. A few massages would do no harm to her body. Now she could just use it as a way to make peace with her. Good exchange. Tang Yaoyao looked at him and said, "You don't have to worry about this matter. I will leave it to Qing-er myself." "Just don't forget," Tang Ning reminded her. Since Fairy Tang is willing to talk to him, it means that his strategy is working. There were still a few days until the wedding, and everything was almost ready. Tang Ning had nothing to do and went to the bookshop with Tang Yao Yao to inspect. Since King Kong vigorously implemented the copyright law, no one on the market dared to privately publish the books recorded by Tang Renzai. The number of customers has increased sharply in the past few days. Of course, no matter how big Tang Renzai is, its scale and manpower are limited, and it is impossible to spend all its resources on publishing a certain volume. In a market as big as the capital, one Tang Renzai simply cannot cater to it. The copyright for the already published volume of The Palace of Eternal Life has been sold to other bookstores at a high price, and they can only publish it 5 days after Tang Renzai's new volume is released. The implementation of the copyright law has benefited not only Tang Renzai, but major bookstores have registered their best-selling books with the government at the price of 10 taels a book. If anyone wants to publish books that are not owned by their own copyright, they need to go to the Imperial College to check first. The one who benefited the most from this matter was King Kong. After all, Tang Ning only made money, but King Kong not only successfully placed his own people in the Imperial College, but also showed his face in front of the civil and military officials of the dynasty and even the emperor. He not only gained real power, but also gained a reputation, and once again dealt a severe blow. King Duan's arrogance. Yesterday morning, Tang Ning received another generous thank you gift from King Kong. After the introduction of the copyright law, Tang Renzai took the initiative to lower the price of books. Other bookstores did not lower the price at first, but later, for some reason, all followed Tang Renzai overnight and took the initiative to lower the price of books by 10%. The people naturally believed that this was the credit of King Kong. In recent days, there have been more and more praises for King Kong. There are naturally differences when there are comparisons. For a long time, the Duan Wang, who has been fighting with King Kong on equal terms, has a reputation among the people that is not as good as King Kong, not to mention that he is on par with King Kong, and even worse than King Run. A few days ago, the 4 gates of the capital, southeast, northwest, built porridge sheds at the same time. Every day at noon, porridge will be distributed for an hour. Whether it is a beggar or a poor person, you can come forward to ask for a bowl of porridge. And this good deed is in the name of King Run. In the imperial palace, in the imperial study, Emperor Chen finished eating the assorted casserole, wiped his mouth, and asked Prince Run, "These days, your teacher only taught you how to cook?" Zhao Yuan shook his head and said, "The teacher didn't teach me, I learned it by myself." Emperor Chen looked at him for a while, and suddenly asked, "What does Yuan want to do when he grows up?" Zhao Yuan thought for a while and said, "When I grow up, I will learn cooking skills from the teacher, make a lot of delicious food for my father and mother, and invite the people who can't afford to eat to dinner, so that they don't have to sell their children." Emperor Chen touched his head, and Prince Run ran out. Emperor Chen looked at the direction of the palace door for a long time, and picked up a memorial from the table. This memorial from the imperial censorate first impeached Prince Duan for condoning his subordinates to oppress the people, and then impeached Prince Kong for forcing the Beijing booksellers to lower the price of books through coercion. Thinking about what Prince Run said just now, a trace of doubt appeared on his face. After a moment, he put down the memorial and murmured, "Wei Jian, do you think I made the wrong choice?" After a long time, there was no response from behind him. Emperor Chen turned around and kicked him. "You guy, you are pretending to be asleep again, wake up, and go out with me." With only 2 days left before the wedding, Tang Ning finally calculated the guests to be invited. After thinking for a while, he walked to the kitchen door, leaned against the door, looked at the old beggar who was making medicinal food for his beloved apprentice, and said, "Old senior, let's discuss something. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 234. Chapter 232 of the main text of the Ruyi young man, the old beggar who consummated the marriage has now transferred all his passion for fine wine to his precious apprentice. Tang Ning could understand that these senior masters wanted to find a talented disciple before they died to pass on their legacy so as not to end the inheritance of martial arts. The old beggar added firewood to the casserole and ignored Tang Ning. He said, "I am very busy and have no time to discuss with you." "I don't have time." Tang Ning nodded, turned around and walked outside, saying, "Xiao Xiao, we won't practice anymore. Practicing is hard, tiring, and not fun at all." The old beggar, holding a fire stick in his hand, appeared in front of him in an instant and asked, "What are we discussing?" It's unreasonable to eat, live, and drink from him, and even kidnapped his sister. He just refused to ask for a small favor. Leave this matter to the old beggar, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. Tang Ning walked to the yard. Xiao Xiao was playing flying chess with a little maid in the mansion. In addition to Qing her mother-in-law sent 2 maids from the county government 2 days ago. He and Xiaoi lived there. After the new house, the family won't need so many maids. In this way, the family finally became lively. Looking at the 2 women talking to Tang Yao Yao in the pavilion, Tang Ning counted them on her fingers, unable to hide the smile on her face. Since the beginning of the year, the capital has been uneasy. Changes in the grasslands situation, the alliance discussion with the Chu state, twists and turns in the imperial examination, human trafficking by the Black Tiger Gang, the Tang family was in a quagmire. This was an eventful year, and it was not until June that everything returned to calm. What the people talked about gradually changed from national events to gossip. Let me tell you something. I passed by the number 1 scholar's mansion today and saw a red word "happy" posted on the door. What's so strange about this? Name on the gold medal list, flowers and candles in the bridal chamber, these are the 2 great joys in life. Isn't it okay to have double happiness at home? But I heard that the number 1 scholar has gotten married. No problem, I'm from Lingzhou. When I was in Lingzhou, I never saw them holding weddings. Maybe they just want to wait until they are nominated for the gold list before getting married. 1 month ago I was the top scorer in high school, and 1 month later I will marry my beautiful wife. At this point in my life, what more can I ask for? The capital, a post house somewhere. The young woman stood in the courtyard with her hands behind her hands. A middle-aged man came over and whispered, "Princess, we have to leave early. If we delay any longer, we may miss important events." Li Tianlan looked back from a distance and said, "Let's set off tomorrow." The middle-aged official nodded slightly, "Yes." Li Tianlan walked into a certain room, changed his clothes, and walked out from the back door of the post house. In Tianrunju, Su Mei wore a loose dress to hide her exquisite figure and alluring charm. She only put on light makeup on her face. Even so, she still exuded a captivating look from the inside out. Charm. As she sneaked out of the room, a voice came from behind her. "Stop." An old woman stood in the corner of the courtyard and asked, "Where do you want to go?" Su Mei looked back at her and asked, "Can't we go out for a walk?" The old woman raised her eyebrows and asked, "Do you know how many things you have accumulated these days?" "Oh, this is the last time. I will start processing it tomorrow." Su Mei glanced at her and walked out quickly. Tang family, in the quiet courtyard. The kingly woman looked at the night slowly covering her face, a trace of regret appeared on her face, but she was more relieved. Tang Shui held her hand and comforted her, "Sister-in-law, how about I help you take a look?" As soon as she finished speaking, a figure jumped down from the wall. The old man with messy hair looked at the beautiful woman and said, "Little girl, I have been entrusted by someone to take you to a place." Tang Shui's expression changed and he asked warily, "Who are you?" As the old man approached, the vigilance on her face lessened, because the old man looked familiar, and she quickly remembered where the familiarity came from. It was already dark, and there were no more pedestrians on the streets of the capital, but inside the Tang mansion, there was a lot of joy. The entire house, from front to back, inside and out, was hung with red lanterns. When Xiaoju walked in, he was slightly startled and asked, "Where are the two brides?" Tang Ning said, "Sent him to the bridal chamber." Xiaoju said in surprise, "Have you finished worshipping?" Tang Ning nodded, "That's it." Xiaoju patted the table and said, "You didn't wait for me for such an important matter." In fact, Xiaoju was the first guest to arrive, but for some reason, Tang Ning advanced the process of worshipping for a while. Fang Hong walked in from outside the door, cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Congratulations." Tang Ning did not invite many people this time. In addition to Xiaoju and Fang Hong, there were also Li Tianlan and Su Mei, as well as shopkeeper Su and Miss Chu Chu. Shopkeeper Su and Miss Chu Chu came together, and Su Mei and Li Tianlan arrived almost at the same time. There are not many guests tonight. Xiaoju, Fang Hong, shopkeeper Su, and their father-in-law and third uncle are at the same table. The girls from Hongxiu Pavilion are at the same table, including Li Tianlan, Su Mei, Tang Yaoyao, and those who were stolen from the Tang family. A table of Tang Shui. It was inconvenient for Miss Tang to see outsiders, so her mother-in-law stayed with her in the room. "Congratulations, number one scholar." Su Mei picked up the wine glass and saluted him from a distance, with a somewhat regretful expression on her face. Su Mei's dress today was very ordinary and not very eye-catching. Tang Ning picked up the wine glass and only took a small sip. If he drinks it all in one gulp like she does, with his drinking capacity, he won't be able to think about anything else at night. Tang Yaoyao glanced at Su Mei, not to be outdone, filled the glass, looked at Tang Ning and said, "Congratulations to you too." After drinking Su Mei's drink, he had to drink Tang Yaoyao's drink. After drinking their two drinks, he couldn't leave Tang Shui and Li Tianlan behind. Tang Ning had already drank a lot just now, and when she walked to the table of the girls in Hongxiu Pavilion, already a little dizzy. Miss Chu Chu poured him a cup of tea and said, "We can't drink wine, and it's the same with tea." Tang Yaoyao and Su Mei were drinking together, but she pushed her under the table. Tang Shui helped her go to the room to rest. Su Mei drank a lot herself. Tang Ning was worried about her going back alone, so she let her rest in the study for the night. The reason why it was a study room and not a wing room was because Su Mei walked into the study room by herself after she was drunk. This was not the first time she slept on that bed. Li Tianlan stood up, her eyes lingered on his face for a long time, and then she waved to him, "I'm leaving." In fact, she didn't drink much. Tang Ning was confident in her skills and just warned her, "Be careful on the road." The last person to be sent away was Xiaoju. When he was helped back by Xiaofu, the words he muttered could no longer be heard clearly. Tang Ning walked to the door of the room with a big red word "happy" on it, and gently pushed the door open and entered. There were two figures wearing red hijabs sitting beside the bed. When Tang Ning walked in, she could clearly see their hands holding the wedding dress tighter. He closed the door, walked to the bed, shook their hands first, and then lifted the two red hijabs at the same time. Both women lowered their heads and their faces were slightly red, not sure whether it was because of the rouge or shyness. Tang Ning sat between them, stretched out her arms, and hugged them. Zhongyi blushed and whispered, "Mister, I haven't drank the Hexen wine yet." Drinking wine together means sharing a glass of wine. Although Tang Ning had already drank a lot today, she still couldn't skip these 2 glasses of wine. When Su Ryu put down the wine glass, her face turned even redder. "Xiao, mister, please stay with Sister Xiaoi tonight, and come to me tomorrow night." She lowered her head and her voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. Zhongyi glanced at Tang Ning, walked over, and whispered in Suaryu's ear. Suaryu's face instantly turned red and wanted to bleed. Tang Ning looked at them and asked, "What are you talking about?" Zhongyi came over, bit his ear and said, "Just this once." The candlelight in the room was extinguished at some point. That night, as the alcohol became stronger, I was turned upside down. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 235. Tang Ning opened his eyes. The early morning sunlight coming in from the window was still a bit dazzling. He closed his eyes again and slowly opened them after a moment. The two women on the left and right were not as full of warmth as they were last night. The two women had already gotten up, but there was still a sweet fragrance in the quilt, which made him reluctant to get up for the time being. Zhongyi walked in from the outside, wet the towel and handed it to him. Thinking of the absurd situation last night, her face turned red again and said, "Mister, get up soon, my parents and third uncle are still waiting." Tang Ning wiped her face and felt much more awake. Suaryu had already prepared clothes for him, and the three of them went out together and walked to the county government office. It is a custom in Lingzhou for newlyweds to return home the day after their wedding. Only after completing all the procedures can the wedding be completed. The old beggar sent Tang Shui and the others back last night. Su Mei left the Tang family early in the morning. As for Tang Yejing, she was still hungover. When Tang Ning and Zhongyi Suaryu went out, she was still sleeping soundly. Yesterday, when I was having a drink with Su Mei, I was very cool. When I woke up later, she had a headache. After returning to the county government office, they served tea to their father-in-law, mother-in-law, uncle and aunt, and then stayed for breakfast. According to convention and custom, Xiao Ryu and Xiao Yi had to stay here until evening, and Tang Ning walked back alone. The old beggar took Xiao Xiao out early in the morning. Tang Ning only knew that it was to train her, but she didn't know how to train her. Tang Yao Yao rubbed her head and staggered out of the room. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Do you have a headache?" Tang Yao Yao nodded, "It hurts." "Wait a minute, I'll get you some hangover soup." Tang Ning walked towards the kitchen and said, "If you can't drink, don't drink. If you have to compete with Su Mei, can you be her opponent?" Tang Yao Yao rubbed her head and whispered, "I drank a lot before, so." Tang Ning cooked a bowl of hangover soup for her and found that there were still a lot of food left over from yesterday, but it didn't matter, King Run would finish it all when he arrived later. If he couldn't solve it, let him pack it up and take it home to eat. After Tang Yao Yao finished drinking the sobering soup, she went back to sleep. Xiaoju rubbed her head and walked in from the outside, sat opposite him, shook her head and said, "I shouldn't have drank so much yesterday, I even forgot about the wedding." Tang Ning also served him a bowl of hangover soup. After Xiaoju finished drinking it, he leaned on the table and said, "The official appointment has been completed, the marriage has been completed, and we are waiting to take office in 2 months. The envoy of Chu State this morning, now that I'm gone, this capital city can finally have some peace and quiet for a few days." Tang Ning was startled when he heard this, looked at him and asked, "The envoy from Chu State left? When did it happen?" Xiaoju rubbed his eyebrows and said, "I left the city gate half an hour ago." Only then did Tang Ning think of why Li Tianlan had glanced at him before leaving yesterday. He immediately asked, "Which city gate?" "It seems to be the West City Gate." "Stop pretending, which one is it?" Xiaoju thought for a moment and said, "It's the West City Gate." Tang Ning stood up and said, "Lend me your horse." Xiaoju's carriage stopped at the door. Tang Ning asked the Xiao family's servants to unload the carriage, led the horse, and walked quickly towards the West Gate. Riding horses was not allowed on the streets of the capital. After leaving the West City Gate, he simply got on his horse, clamped the horse's belly, shook the reins, and galloped along the official road. The Chu State's envoys were quite large in number and their marching speed should not be fast. However, Tang Ning rode for more than 10 miles and looked ahead. There was no sign of the envoys on the long official road. He reined in his horse, looked forward, sighed softly, and murmured, "I left without even saying hello." There was the unhurried sound of horse hooves behind him. Li Tianlan, dressed in men's clothing, was riding a horse and came out of the forest nearby. He looked at him and said, "I told you clearly last night that I was leaving, but you didn't care." Tang Ning looked back at her, thinking that the woman was just being unreasonable, and said, "How did I know that you were talking about returning to Chu country?" He turned over and dismounted and asked, "Are you waiting for me here?" Li Tianlan got off the horse and said, "If you come another quarter of an hour later, I will really leave." Thinking that after the separation, she might never have the chance to see each other again, Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Why don't you let someone inform you?" Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "One moment is worth 1,000 pieces of gold, how dare you bother me?" After all, they were brothers who had shared life and death together and had indirectly kissed each other. To say such a thing was to be outspoken. Tang Ning tied up the horse, stood side by side with her, and said, "I don't know when we'll see you next time." Li Tianlan looked at him and suddenly said, "I really want to kidnap you back to Chu Kingdom." Tang Ning also looked at her and said nonchalantly, "You still have a chance now." "Forget it." Li Tianlan shook his head and said, "The person who gets you will not get your heart. Your heart is in Chengguo. I can't believe that she actually wants to get his person. She is so powerful. If she uses force, she will definitely not be able to resist." When the topic of parting came up, she always felt a little sad. Tang Ning broke a willow branch from the roadside and handed it to her, saying, "Have a good trip. I'll see you in Chu when I have the opportunity." The Chu state and the Chen state are adjacent to each other, and they are not in a hostile relationship. They may not be unable to consider going out to play with Xiao Yiziru and the others in the future. Li Tianlan took the willow branch, looked at him deeply, and said, "It's late, I'm leaving." Tang Ning rode on his horse, watching Li Tianlan gallop away, gradually disappearing from his sight. He stayed there for a while before turning his horse around and heading towards the capital. When he returned, Tang Yaoyao had already gotten up to practice swordplay. Seeing him come in, she put away her sword and asked, "Where have you been?" Tang Ning said, "Miss Li left, I went to see her off." Li Tianlan left. Tang Yaoyao was stunned and asked, "Going back to Chu?" Tang Ning nodded. "She went back so early." Tang Yaoyao said with some regret, "I wanted to find her to practice with again." Her expression was regretful, and Tang Ning could see the joy in her eyes. Tang Ning reminded her, "You can find Miss Su." "What do you care?" Tang Yaoyao glared at him, picked up the sword again, and walked into the martial arts training ground. Even if Tang Yaoyao wanted to practice with Su Mei, it would be unlikely. Since Li Tianlan left, Su Mei had not come for nearly 10 days. During this period, Tang Ning went to Tianrunja for a meal, but she didn't come out. She must be busy with something. After mid-June, the weather suddenly became much hotter. After noon, you can't stay outside. Tang Ning built an indoor swimming pool to escape the heat, but the hateful Tang Yejing not only occupied his swimming pool, but also occupied his wife. He took Xiao Xiao and Qing and stayed inside after noon. He also asked 2 maids to watch at the door and not let him go in. In desperation, Tang Ning had to buy some saltpeter at the pharmacy, took 2 copper basins, one large and one small, filled the small copper basin with cold well water, put it in the large copper basin, then put the saltpeter into the large copper basin, and gradually added water. Because the ratio was not right, he failed several times before he could make a small piece of ice. He originally thought that by using the principle that saltpeter would absorb heat when dissolved in water, he could quickly make a large block of ice. However, after actual operation, he found that although saltpeter could make ice, the effect did not seem to be as good as he imagined. Of course, it might be that he had not yet mastered the most suitable ratio. King Run squatted beside him and asked curiously, "Sir, what are you doing?" After many experiments, Tang Ning had mastered the approximate ratio of saltpeter and water. During the last experiment, as soon as he added water to the large copper basin, a thin layer of floating ice soon appeared in the small copper basin. King Run stared at the scene with wide eyes and said in surprise, "Sir, are you a god?" As soon as he finished speaking, a figure ran in from the door, looked at him, and said happily, "Brother Tang Ning." Tang Ning raised his head and looked at the beautiful girl standing in the sun, with a slender figure and a pretty face. After a moment of surprise, he said in surprise, "Little girl, do you know me?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 236. Tang Ning looked at the beautiful girl standing in front of him with a puzzled look on her face. He only knew two beautiful girls, Su Mei and Tang Shui, in the capital. He didn't know any beautiful girls, but it was extremely strange that this little girl in front of him could call him by his name accurately. The little girl turned her skirt around and said, "Brother Tang Ning, don't you recognize me?" "Little sister, are you?" Tang Ning stood up, and just as she spoke, she suddenly saw a familiar feeling on her pretty face. He thought for a while and said in shock, "You are Xinyu." The little girl looked at him and said happily, "Brother Tang Ning, you finally recognized me." "Are you really Xinyu?" Tang Ning walked around her with a look of doubt on her face. How could this be Fang Xiaopang? Nothing about her body looked like the Fang Xiaopang he knew. King Run on the side pointed at her and was even more surprised, "You are Fang Xinyu?" The little girl looked at him and said, "Zhao Yuan, I haven't seen you for a few years, and you have gained weight again." When King Run heard this, he couldn't help but shiver, and hurriedly ran to the side, picked up his box full of food, and hugged him tightly. After not seeing each other for half a year, Fang Xiaopang seemed like a different person. Not only had she lost weight, but she had also grown taller. Even if she stood in front of Tang Ning couldn't believe it. He finally accepted this fact and asked, "Xiao Yu, why did you come to the capital?" "Uncle is going to take grandma to the capital, so we are all here." Fang Xinyu looked at him and said with a smile, "I heard from uncle that brother Tang Ning won the first prize in the exam and is as good as my father." What she heard was a familiar voice, but what she saw was a different face. Tang Ning always felt that something was strange. Sure enough, every fat man has potential. Who would have thought that the little fat man who competed with him for cakes a year ago could complete the gorgeous transformation from an ugly duckling to a swan in such a short period of time? Tang Yao Yao walked out of the inner courtyard and asked, "Who are you talking to?" "Sister Yao Yao." Fang Xinyu saw her and immediately ran over. Tang Yao Yao looked at the little girl who rushed over to hug her, and said in surprise, "Little sister, do you know me?" Not only Tang Yao Yao didn't believe it, but Zhongyi and Su Ru also found it hard to believe that the beautiful girl standing in front of them was Fang Xiaopang from half a year ago. Zhao Yuan looked at Fang Xinyu from a distance, wondering, "She used to be fatter than me." Tang Ning said, "If you only eat 2 pastries a day, you can be as thin as her." Zhao Yuan shook his head and said, "If you can't eat whatever you want every day, then what's the point of life?" Fang Xiaopang was born in the year of the sparrow, and would chatter non-stop no matter what happened. First, he happily quarreled with Tang Yao Yao and the others for a while. After discovering that there was an unknown young lady here, he ran over and asking the West, and Xiao 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 didn't listen. One of them is quiet, the other is noisy, and their personalities complement each other. Tang Ning hopes that they can become good friends, so that Fang Xiaopang will have another playmate and Xiao Xiao will not be bored. The little sparrow Fang Xinyu is lively, and even the weather seems to be less stuffy. Tang Ning has mastered the ratio of saltpeter and water, and found that when the effect is best, it is impossible to condense the water in the basin into a large ice cube, but if it is replaced with a smaller container, it can condense quickly. Tang Ning planned to make some watermelon popsicles, but unfortunately she couldn't find a suitable mold, so she had to settle for a few deeper cups. King Run had been following him. When he saw him scooping out all the pulp of half a watermelon with a spoon, he licked his lips and asked, "Sir, what are you doing? Is there anything I can do to help you, please?" Tang Ning was about to prepare some ingredients when she handed him the watermelon and said, "Put all the watermelon flesh into the bowl and pick out all the watermelon seeds." Okay, King Run took the spoon and was eager to try it. He had never even heard of watermelon popsicles, they must be delicious. While King Run was picking watermelon seeds, Tang Ning took some sugar and glutinous rice flour and mixed them evenly to make a paste. After finishing, King Run came over with a big bowl and said, "Sir, we picked them all." Tang Ning mashes the melon pulp to extract the juice, and mixes it with the prepared glutinous rice sugar juice. Using cups as molds is still a bit difficult, so a batch of molds must be customized as soon as possible. A small cup-shaped popsicle came out quickly. King Run swallowed his saliva and asked, "Sir, can this be eaten?" He made it just for food. Tang Ning finally took it out of the cup, but was snatched away by a hand from behind. "What is this?" Tang Yao Yao asked curiously, holding up the chopsticks. Tang Ning replied, "Popsicle." Tang Yao Yao looked at him and asked, "Can I eat it?" Tang Ning reached out to grab it and said, "Give it back to me. If you want to eat it, I'll make it for you again later. It's edible." Tang Yao Yao stuck out her tongue and licked it quickly, then handed it to Tang Ning and asked, "Do you want more?" "Want? Bah, shameless." Tang Yao Yao glanced at him, happily added popsicles, and praised, "It's so sweet, and it's also cool." Tang Yaji, who had never eaten popsicles before, unexpectedly knew that these things are meant to be licked. However, the smile on her face soon disappeared. She had a painful expression, clutching her stomach, and rolled on the bed. She looked at Tang Ning and gritted her teeth, You hurt me." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "Xiao I and Xiru are fine after eating it, Xiao Xiao is fine after eating it, Xiao Yu is fine after eating it, why do you have a stomachache?" "How should I know?" Tang Yao Yao glared at him and asked, "Did you give me a bad one on purpose?" "What do you mean I gave you? You stole it." Tang Ning glanced at her and suddenly seemed to think of something and asked, "You are not, that one is coming." Tang Yao Yao gritted her teeth and said, "Which one?" "It's the one you need to drink more hot water." Tang Yao Yao was stunned and her face turned red. She hurriedly said, "Shut up, don't say anything." No wonder her hair was not wet when she came out of the backyard. It turned out that she didn't go into the water at all, dare to eat ice during this special period, suffer once, let's see if she dares to be so arrogant next time. Tang Ning glanced at her and said, "Wait." A moment later, Tang Yao Yao was lying comfortably on the bed with a hot water bottle in her arms, drinking ginger and brown sugar water, and handed the empty bowl to Tang Ning, saying, "Give me another bowl." Tang Ning looked at her and said, "You asked others for help, but you didn't even say please." Tang Yao Yao thought for a while and said, "Please give me another bowl." Tang Ning took the bowl and said, "Remember to be more tactful next time." Tang Yao Yao thought for a while, grabbed his arm, and said in a soft voice, "Brother Tang Ning, give me another bowl." Tang Ning's hand trembled and he almost dropped the bowl on the ground. He looked at Tang Yao Yao and said seriously, "Don't be tactful next time." He walked into the room with the brown sugar water. Since Li Tianlan left, Su Mei hadn't appeared for a long time. Without a natural enemy, Tang Yao Yao was obviously much more active, and even practiced martial arts less actively. I don't know what Suhuli has been busy with these days. She must have not had a good sleep for a long time. I don't know where Li Tianlan has gone. According to the normal speed, he should have passed Lingzhou. Tianrunju, Su Mei sat among a pile of documents, looking tired. She took out a sachet from her chest, smelled it, and took a nap on the table. Lingzhou, post house. A young man walked up to the middle-aged envoy and said hesitantly, "Sir, we have stayed here for 3 days. It's time to set off, right?" The middle-aged envoy sighed and said, "Let's wait for the princess to order." The young envoy shook his head and said, "The princess has been a little strange these days." The middle-aged man frowned and said, "You can't talk about the princess." The young envoy immediately said, "I know my mistake." After the young envoy left, the middle-aged man sighed again. After leaving Beijing, the princess became a little strange. That day she only said that the delegation should go ahead and she would catch up in a quarter of an hour, but it actually took her nearly 2 hours. Along the way, she was often absent-minded and dazed. When she passed Lingzhou, she clearly had nothing to do, but she inexplicably stayed there for 3 days. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 237. Tang Yao Yao finally stopped moving in the past 2 days. If you think about it carefully, she seems to become sluggish during these few days every month. She couldn't touch cold water, couldn't blow cold wind, and naturally couldn't eat popsicles. In addition to watermelon flavor, Tang Ning added several more flavors. She sat in front of the bed and ate them for her to see. Tang Yao Yao glared at him and said, "Don't be too proud." Tang Ning ignored her. After a while, Tang Yao Yao moved closer to the bed and said, "Give me a bite." Tang Ning said calmly, "No." Tang Yao Yao pretended to be pitiful and said, "Just one bite." Tang Ning was already immune to her cuteness. She shook her head and said firmly, "I won't give you a bite." Tang Yao Yao finally returned to his true self, crossed his arms over his chest, and said angrily, "Then stay away from me." Tang Ning walked out of the room. He could counterattack Tang Yao Yao for only a few days. When she resurrected with full health in a few days, it would be Tang Ning's turn to be unable to get up. Fang Xiaoyu and Xiao Xiao each took a popsicle and ate it. Tang Ning's limit for them was 2 popsicles per day. He can no longer call her Fang Xiaopang or Fang Menu. In half a year, she has slimmed down from a full moon to a crescent moon, which can be called an inspirational legend. Of course, there are positive examples and negative examples. Zhao Yuanzhang stuck his butt out, squatting in front of the copper basin, adding water to the large copper basin where saltpeter was placed. He watched a thin layer of ice gradually condense in the small copper basin, and then poured the thin ice into the basin. Take it out, put it in your mouth, and make a crunching sound. Tang Ning remembered that he had read information before. The technology of making ice with saltpeter seemed to have been available at the end of the Tang dynasty. However, the end of the Tang dynasty in this world was different from the other world he was familiar with. It lacked the technology of 150 years. It is not unusual for history to have strange changes. Or maybe saltpeter is not very efficient in making ice and has been abandoned by people in the development of history. Nowadays, only the royal family and wealthy families in the capital who own ice cellars can use ice cubes in the hot summer. Royal Palace. Chen Huang drank the ice-cold wine, looked at the scorching sun outside, shook his head and said, "I don't know how long this drought will last. If it continues to be so hot, I'm afraid something will happen." Wei Jian took a step forward and said, "Your Majesty, the Qintian prison has received news. There should be a rain in the capital within 3 days. Your Majesty, don't worry." Emperor Chen glanced at him and said angrily, "How has the weather predicted by Qin Tianjian ever been accurate?" Wei Jian smiled awkwardly and said, "Maybe this time it will be right." Emperor Chen thought for a moment and asked, "How much ice is left in the palace?" Wei Jiandao, in previous years, when stored from winter to summer, more than half of the ice would melt. This year, the weather is hotter, and the ice will melt by another 20%. There is not much ice left. Send some more to Concubine Shu, Concubine Hui, and Concubine Xian, Emperor Chen ordered, and then said, "Where has Yuan gone? Why haven't you seen her today?" Wei Jian thought for a while and said, "I said I went to the Fang family." Lord Fang took the old lady to the capital, and Concubine Shu also wanted to go out of the palace to see the old lady. "This is what it should be." Emperor Chen nodded and said, "You should arrange this matter as soon as possible. Concubine Shu has not seen the old lady for a long time." "Father, I'm back." A voice came from outside the palace. King Run ran in from outside the palace with 2 copper basins, one large and one small. When he ran in, he accidentally tripped and the copper basins flew out. He got up, patted his butt, picked up the copper basin, and said happily, "Father, let me do a trick for you." Chen Huang stepped forward and asked, "What trick?" King Run ran to the door of the palace and said, "Bring the things in quickly." One eunuch carried a bucket, and another eunuch held a box containing white powder and walked in from outside the palace. Also walking in at the same time were 2 old men. Emperor Chen watched King Run put the small basin into the big basin and poured the white powder into the big basin. He waved his hands to the 2 old men and said, "2 bachelors, please wait for a moment. If you have anything to do, we'll talk about it later." "Father, please watch carefully." King Run looked back at Huang Chen and poured the water in the bucket into the big basin. The water in the large basin quickly became turbid, but otherwise there was nothing remarkable about it. Chen Huang looked at him and asked, "Is this Yuan's trick?" "Father, wait a minute." Zhao Yuan squatted on the ground with his butt stuck out, staring at the small copper basin, and saw that the water surface of the small copper basin gradually began to change. Chen Huang looked at the thin layer of ice gradually emerging from the small copper basin. He was shocked by the summer ice trick and said in surprise, "What kind of trick is this?" Zhao Yuan said proudly, "How about it, is it awesome?" Chen Huang thought for a while, looked at him and asked, "Is this what your husband taught you?" Zhao Yuan said embarrassedly, "I learned it secretly while standing by. I can also make popsicles. I will make them for my father later." An old man standing aside couldn't help but said, "Your Highness should learn more knowledge instead of these strange and obscene techniques. Did your Highness memorize yesterday's poem?" King Run shook his head and said, "Sir, you don't need to memorize those messy things. Juggling is also knowledge, and it is a university subject. If the people knew this knowledge, there wouldn't be so many people dying of heat in the summer, and memorizing poems can't be eaten by people even if you are full, you can't feel cool. Those people who write poems will only make people memorize." The gentleman said that juggling requires a lot of knowledge, and the following words were understood by him himself. If there were fewer poets and poets in the world, they wouldn't have to memorize so many poems and articles. That's nonsense. The old man's beard trembled with anger as he said, "Writing poetry is to cultivate one's sentiments, to entertain one's emotions, and to express one's aspirations. Who dares to say such nonsense?" Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "Grandmaster Chen, let's calm down first." He also knew why the academician was so angry. Academician Chen was a leading figure in the literary world and was good at poetry, so naturally he would not tolerate any slanderous words from others. "Your Majesty, how can I not be angry?" Academician Chen was still angry and said, "This person is simply misleading people. How can a crazy student who doesn't even understand poetry teach His Highness Prince Run? He really understands poetry." Chen Huang looked at Grand Scholar Chen and said helplessly, "Have you ever heard of poetry maniac, Grand Scholar?" Bachelor Chen was obviously no stranger to this title, and was shocked. Tang Ning, the new champion. In fact, there is no one in the capital who is fond of poetry who does not know the name of Poetry Madman. Although he doesn't have many poems in his collection, his poems are all excellent. He can be said to be the biggest dark horse to emerge in Chengguo's poetry circle this year. Tang Ning, the mad poet, is the #1 talented woman in Zhongai. The names of the two of them are the two mountains that weigh on the current poetry world. They are intimidating and cannot make any comparisons. Those who say that poetry is crazy and do not understand poetry are the real crazy ones. Academician Chen's face turned red and white, and finally he could only grit his teeth and said bitterly, he is insulting the gentleman. Even though he is learned and talented, but it's not right to lead His Highness to indulge in kinky techniques. Another bachelor suddenly stepped forward and said, Master Chen, what you said is wrong. Rich families in the capital have ice cellars that can be used to relieve the heat in summer, but the poor people can only endure the heat. If I just said you read that right, Your Highness uses saltpeter to make ice in the summer. Saltpeter is cheap. If the common people can master this method, wouldn't it be an extra way to relieve the heat? Therefore, what Your Highness uses is not a strange and obscene technique, but it is a method that benefits the people. Academician Chen wanted to say more, but the old man beside him winked at him, and he said no more. After a while, the two of them walked out of the hall, and Academician Chen couldn't help but ask, even so, His Highness cannot be allowed to neglect his studies. Reading can not only deepen his knowledge, but also cultivate virtue. The old man looked at him, shook his head and said, It's not that the more you read, the better your virtues will be. Although His Highness Prince Run is young and playful, his virtues are not lacking. Even Prince Duankong is not as good as him. Academician Chen was stunned and immediately said, You mean? The old man shook his head and said, I didn't say anything. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 238. Zhao Yuan chewed the ice, raised her head, and asked proudly, Father, am I great? Chen Huang looked at him and asked, Does Yuan know why the water in the small basin freezes when saltpeter powder is put into a large basin? The teacher said that when saltpeter melts in water, it absorbs all the heat around it, so the water in the small basin will freeze. Zhao Yuan thought for a while and then said, Father, let me tell the people about this. The gentleman also said that after the saltpeter melts and the water is dried, the saltpeter will come out again and can be used again. In this way, the people will not faint and die from the heat. Chen Huang smiled, touched his head and said, Okay, just Yuan. He. Zhao Yuan smiled stupidly and said, Father, I haven't done this trick for my mother and concubine yet. I'll show it to my mother and concubine. He looked at the two eunuchs and said, Help me move these things over here. King Run couldn't wait to run to Shuxia Palace. Emperor Chen put a thin piece of ice on the palm of his hand and asked, Wei Jian, what do you think of Yuan's character? Wei Jian thought for a while and said, Your Highness can think of the people when eating fish, and he can think of the people when playing. Even when he does tricks, he thinks of the people. Although His Highness King Run is playful, he has a pure heart and thinks of the people in everything. Being able to understand the sufferings of the people is something Your Majesty and Your Empress have taught you well. I congratulate you, Your Majesty, and congratulate Your Empress. Children are always playful. Chen Huang smiled and said softly, It will be fine when he grows up. The difficult thing is that when he grows up, he will not be confused by other things and can still maintain this a peace of mind. Wei Jian squinted his eyes and said with a smile, With Your Majesty and Your Majesty watching, and the #1 scholar as a famous teacher, who is good at teaching, how could His Highness lose his innocence? It is very comfortable to have no need to study or go to work. What Tang Ning has to do every day is to go out with Xiao Yi and Xiao Ru, spend some time in the world of 3 people, and then go home to study how to make popsicles. Until now, we have tried 8 flavors, and the popsicles we have made range from a single cup-shaped to heart-shaped, star-shaped, and other shapes. In the name of King Run, Emperor Chen spread the method of making ice from saltpeter so that people could make it at home. Saltpeter is not expensive, and it can be reused after it is dried. It is not enough to make a profit, but it is good for the people to use it to relieve the heat. Tang Ning was not surprised that Emperor Chen announced this matter. What surprised him was that it was done in the name of Prince Run. Thinking of the last time he gave soup, he couldn't help but think of something. King Kong and King Duan fought fiercely in the court, but Emperor Chen only doted on King Run. If the elders were not arranged in an orderly manner, King Run was too young, and there would have been a turmoil in the court. But judging from the current situation, Emperor Chen is in his prime. Under normal circumstances, it is not a problem to live for another 10 or 20 years. It is really uncertain who will take the throne by then. There are not many such things in history, and there is no ancestral law that stipulates that a fat man cannot be an emperor. There are many potentials among fat men, and maybe King Run is one of them. Tang Ning looked to the side. Fang Xiaoyu was performing the Chinese characters on a blank paper trick for King Run. Zhao Yuan stood beside her, looking at her in a daze. Fang Xinyu looked at him and asked, "Want to learn?" Zhao Yuan nodded repeatedly, "I think. If you want, just call me sister and I'll listen." Sister. Tang Ning took back his previous comment about King Run as a potential stock. He was a manly man with no backbone at all. How could he have such a disciple? Tang Shui walked in from outside the courtyard and asked, "Where is Xiaoru?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "I went out with Xiaoi. Do you have anything to do with her?" Tang Shui looked at him. After Tang Ning thought for a while, she asked, "Cousin, do you have anything to do with Xiaoru?" He asked Xiaoju carefully to find out what kind of magic the Tang family's witch had. After asking, he decided to avoid her sharpness in the future. Tang Shui took out a bracelet from his arms and said, "My sister-in-law asked me to give this to Xiaoru." The bracelet in her hand was different from the one in Zhongyi's hand, but it was obviously valuable. Not only that, Tang Ning even noticed that the bracelet on Tang Shui's wrist was exactly the same as Xiao Yi's. Without thinking much, he put the bracelet away and said, "When Xiaoru comes back, I will give it to her." Tang Shui nodded, looked at Tang Yao Yao who came out of the room, and asked, "Who are you, Miss Tang? Why do you always live with you guys? Do you?" "You," Tang Yao Yao paused and looked at her, his beautiful brows furrowed. He didn't know what he thought of, but he just hummed softly without having an attack. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything else." Tang Shui looked at her and said apologetically, "Girl, don't get me wrong." Tang Ning looked at them and suddenly thought of something. Between the witch and the goblin, I don't know who is better. Anyway, I have nothing to do now, so why not have some fun? She looked at Tang Yao Yao and said, "My cousin also knows some martial arts. Didn't you say that Miss Li is gone and you don't even have anyone to spar with? How about you guys spar with each other?" Judging from her constant desire to find someone to practice with, Tang Yajing has a warlike element in her body. Coincidentally, as far as Tang Ning knew, Tang Shui, the capital witch, was not an energy-efficient lamp either. When Tang Yao Yao heard this, she was startled for a moment, and then she looked at Tang Shui, a little eager to give it a try. Tang Shui looked at her, smiled slightly, and said, "Okay, maybe it's been a long time since I competed with others in martial arts." As the two of them walked towards the martial arts training ground in the backyard, Tang Ning hurriedly ran to King Run and said, "Hurry up, give me a handful of your melon seeds." There was a pavilion at the front of the martial arts training ground. Tang Ning was sitting alone in the pavilion, eating melon seeds and looking at the two figures with their clothes flying on the grass. After taking a few glances, he made a mental ranking of the strength of the women he knew. Su Mei naturally deserves the first place, and the second place is Li Tianlan. Judging from the situation in front of her, Tang Shui should be more powerful than Tang Yao Yao. After all, Her title as the capital which is used bit by bit. Knocked down with a fist. Sure enough, after dozens of moves, Tang Yaoyao was forced into a corner with no way out. Tang Shui did not continue, but stopped where he was and said, Miss Yaoyao's martial arts is very good, I accept the offer. Tang Yaoyao simply admitted, I can't beat you. After Tang Shui left, Tang Yaoyao sat in the pavilion and didn't seem to be in a very high mood. Tang Ning could understand her mood. Fairy Tang was born to be strong, but recently she couldn't beat anyone she met. She was hit one after another, so she naturally wasn't in a good mood. Tang Ning looked at her and consoled her, don't be sad. Although you are no match for Su Mei, Li Tianlan, and Tang Shui, Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi can't beat you, and Xiao Yu and Xiao Xiao are far from your match either. Tang Yaoyao looked up at him and asked, are you laughing at me? Tang Ning shook her head, absolutely not. Tang Yaoyao looked at him and said, although I can't beat Su Mei, Li Tianlan, and Tang Shui, I can beat another person. Tang Ning was alert, who? Tang Yaoyao looked at him, smiled and said, cousin Li Qing. Tang Ning was shocked and immediately said, we have agreed that no one will mention this matter. Okay, let's not mention Li Qing. If we don't mention Li Qing. Tang Yaoyao stood up, stretched out her hand to him, and said, Tang Ning, please enlighten me. Tang Ning walked out of the pavilion and said, I don't hit women. Tang Yaoyao snorted coldly, don't think that I don't know. In your heart, you have never considered me a woman. Don't be like this. If you keep doing this, I'll fight back. I really fought back. Tang Ning couldn't resist, because after 2 moves, Tang Yaoyao threw him to the ground, his hands were clasped behind his back, and Tang Yaoyao was riding on him from behind. Tang Yaoyao looked at him condescendingly and said, I'll let you laugh at me again in the future. Cough. A heavy cough came from the front. Tang Ning raised her head with difficulty and saw her father-in-law, who looked embarrassed, and rich man Tang, who was standing next to him with a livid face. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 239. Tang Yaoyao, who was at the bottom in terms of strength, could not bully anyone more powerful than her, so she could only bully Tang Ning. As a result, she got too carried away and rode on him to show off her power, which happened to be seen by the rich man Tang who had just arrived in the capital. When rich man Tang asked her to come into the room to talk, his face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. Tang Ning got up from the grass and patted the grass clippings on her body. Zhong Mingli came over and looked at him, saying helplessly, Yao Yao is a girl. Don't bully her all the time. Just let her be. Tang Ning extremely doubted whether the person in front of her was his father-in-law. Tang Yaoyao was already riding on him to dominate, and it was on the grass, not on the bed, not on the chair, nor in messy places like the kitchen, swimming pool, and bathroom. The most important thing was that they were all wearing clothes. How could he feel that he was bullying her? In the room, Tang Yaoyao lowered her head. Rich man Tang looked at her and said bitterly, it's okay if you sneak to the capital alone. I won't argue with you, but what were you doing just now? Is it ridiculous for a girl who has not yet left the court to ride on a man? Last time you were flirting and fighting in the street, I already reminded you. How can you get married if outsiders see it? Rich man Tang's chest heaved and spit flew. He took a sip of tea and said, no, you can't stay in the capital anymore. Come back to Lingzhou with me tomorrow. I won't go back. Tang Yaoyao looked at him and said seriously, I will stay in the capital. Rich man Tang smiled instead of being angry and said, okay, it's okay if you don't go back. From today on, I won't give you a penny, and your Uncle Su won't give it to you either. You can't even get it in the store in the capital, even a copper. Tang Yaoyao ignored him and said, if you don't want to take it, don't take it. You don't have much silver left. Rich man Tang took a sip of tea, looked at her and said, let me see how long you can last. Tang Yao Yao thought for a moment and said, not much, just over 1 million taels. It's probably enough for a lifetime. Rich man Tang squirted out a mouthful of tea and said in shock, where did you get so much money? Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said, I won't tell you. Rich man Tang looked at her, suddenly smiled, and said, you have only been in the capital for a short time. Even if you rob, you can't get so much money. Don't even think about lying to dad. Robbing money is not so fast, but there is money in gambling. I first bet all my money on him winning the first prize, and then all my money on him winning the top prize. I accidentally won so much. Tang Yao Yao took out a stack of banknotes from her arms, put it on the table, and said, this is the 10,000 taels I took from home. Now I will return it to dad, and the rest will be regarded as interest. Tang Cai opened his mouth and realized that there seemed to be nothing he could do except threaten her with her pocket money. Thinking of this, his tone immediately softened and he advised, Yao Yao, this capital is not a good place, and there are not many good people. You and your father return to Lingzhou, and your father promises not to force you to get married. When do you want to get married, people? Just get married whenever you want. I won't go back. Tang Yao Yao shook his head and said, I don't have many friends in Lingzhou. I won't be bored to death if I go back. Mr. Tang patted his thigh and said with a bit of hatred, what good is that boy? He can charm you so much that you won't even go home. Dad, Tang Yao Yao glared at him and said angrily, who has confused him? Don't talk nonsense. Mr. Tang patted the table and said, why are you riding on him if you're not obsessed with him? Is this something that a young girl like you can do? Tang Yao Yao waved his hand angrily, no matter what you think, we are innocent anyway. Rich man Tang snorted coldly, is there innocence between men and women? That's because your thoughts are impure. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said, he treats me as his brother, and I treat him as my sister, isn't that okay? After saying that, she shook her head and strode out. You're so mad at me. Rich man Tang sat on a chair, breathing heavily, drinking cup after cup of herbal tea. Zhou Mingli walked in from the outside and said, Yao Yao is an adult too. She knows what things should be done and what things should not be done. Why are you so worried? Rich man Tang blew his beard and glared at Zhou Mingli, and said angrily, you still have the nerve to tell me what I told you at the beginning. I asked you to take good care of her for me after arriving in the capital. Is this how you take care of her? What's wrong with me? Zhou Mingli looked at him and said, when Yao Yao was in the capital, she had food and accommodation in the county government office. Ninger and Xiaoi are her good friends, and they take good care of her. Tang Ji looked at Zhou Mingli, took a deep breath, and after a moment, he slowly said, Zhou Mingli, I have already warned you, whether you like it or not, if you regret it in the future, don't come to me. Tang Ning looked at Tang Yao Yao who walked out of the room angrily and asked, what, is your father going to take you back to Lingzhou? I won't go back. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said, I will move next door today. Tang Ning said politely, anyway, there are a lot of empty rooms here. You can live in any one you choose. It would be too troublesome to move in and recruit some maids and servants. Tang Yao Yao glared at him and said angrily, who am I to you? Why should I live in your house? I have my own hands, feet, and my own house. I will move out soon. Tang Ning watched her leave even more angrily than before, and couldn't calm down for a moment. What happened? After a long time, he shook his head helplessly. Women. Xiaoju stood at the door, looked back, then turned to look at him and asked, you bullied Miss Tang again and made her angry. Tang Ning couldn't help asking, why can't she bully me? Xiaoju looked at him and said, she's just a little better at martial arts. No matter how good her martial arts are, she's still a woman. If you don't provoke her, how can she get angry for no reason? Tang Ning admitted that he was a little naughty and a little bit pretentious in the past. He was not used to not quarreling and bickering with Tang Yejing for a day, but he was really honest just now. Sometimes women get angry, it's so inexplicable. There are some rumors in the streets these days. Xiaoju thought of something, looked at him and said, the Tang family doesn't seem to mind that the incident 20 years ago was known to the people. It's been a hot topic these days. Tang Ning nodded and said, I know. It is naturally against the ethics for a young lady from a big family to run away from marriage and elope. It is understandable that the family can catch her back. The common people just felt that it was not good to forcefully separate a couple, but after all, it was also a family affair of a big family. This matter spread widely, which was actually a good thing for the Tang family. This family scandal did not have a serious impact on them. In fact, in the eyes of many people, the Tang family was on the right side of the issue. The common people were only responsible for watching the show, but Tang Ning was not. The Tang family had done so many things in secret, and they were still thinking about building a memorial archway. The idea was too good. He looked at Xiaoju and said, I want to discuss something with you. Xiaoju was surprised and said, what is it? It's about making money. The matter that Tang Ning discussed with Xiaoju was not only related to him, but also to Lu Jun, Mu Yu, Huang Yulong, Gu Bai, and others. Of course, whether to participate or not depends on their intentions. Tangrenzai is in the western district of the capital. People living in the eastern district have to cross the entire capital to buy books, which is extremely inconvenient. As it happens, those young ladies and daughters of wealthy families who have nothing to do all day and like to hide at home and cry over storybooks, almost all live in the wealthy areas of the East District. So he plans to open a branch of Tangrenzai in the East District of the capital to facilitate customers living in the East District. Xiaoju looked at him and asked in confusion, investment? Tang Ning explained, you pay the money, and according to the amount of money you pay, you will be given dividends every month. Please ask Lu Jun and others if they are willing to participate. After Xiaoju understood, he said without hesitation, only fools are unwilling to participate in making money. Although their family is rich, it is not theirs. The Tang family is rich, but Tang Ersha is so poor that he has to collect protection fees from those ruffians. Lu Jun and others are even poorer than Tang Ersha. They will not let go of such things. Tang Ning nodded and said, then this matter is left to you. Xiaoju patted his chest and said, I will go to find them now. After sending Xiaoju away, Tang Ning turned around and saw the rich man Tang walking out of the room. Tang Ning looked at him and bowed, saying, hello, uncle. Humph. Mr. Tang looked at him, snorted heavily, and strode away. Tang Ning stood there in a daze. He didn't owe Mr. Tang money, nor did he steal her daughter, so what was his attitude? For the fastest update of error-free novels, please visit and bookmark this site to read the latest novels. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 240. Tang Yao Yao moved right away when she said she wanted to. In the afternoon, she packed up her things and moved into the house next door. The layout of the two houses is similar, and the decoration is similar. The house she bought has been completed a long time ago, but Tang Yejing doesn't want to cause trouble by recruiting more maids and servants, and doesn't want to live alone in a big house, so she has been living here. When Tang Ning was helping her move things, she saw shopkeeper Su following behind rich man Tang. There were already many maids and servants starting to work in the house. The two families were neighbors in Lingzhou, and now in the capital, they are still neighbors. This is fate. As the saying goes, water from afar cannot quench the thirst of the near. Distant relatives are not as good as close neighbors. Neighbors should be friendly and help each other. Although Tang Yajiao is not a friendly and loving neighbor, she can be regarded as a good neighbor because of her cuteness. Tang Ji walked around the house and nodded, "This place is not bad." Shopkeeper Su smiled and said, "The place chosen by the young lady is naturally good." Tang Ji withdrew his gaze, looked at him, and frowned, "Lao Su, what did I tell you in the letter? I asked you to keep an eye on her, and this is how you kept an eye on her for me." Shopkeeper Su looked troubled and said, "Shopkeeper, when I received your letter, the lady had already moved out of Hungzhou Pavilion. There is nothing I can do about this." "Forget it," Tang Ji waved his hand and said, "Yao Yao, did she really earn so much money in such a short period of time?" Shopkeeper Su nodded and said, "I've heard about this too. There shouldn't be any lies. Mr. Tang won first the provincial prize and then the first prize. The odds are very high. If you bet twice in a row, you can earn dozens of dollars times, it's not difficult." Tang Ji had a dark face and said angrily, "This stinky boy. Controlling her daughter's pocket money is the ultimate and most effective way to make her obedient. Now she has a net worth of 1 million taels. She has her own industry whether in Lingzhou or the capital. In the future, she is afraid that she can no longer be threatened with money." Thinking of this, he became angry, waved his sleeves, watched Tang Yao Yao move things to a yard, looked around, and suddenly asked, "This next door?" Shopkeeper Su said, "The house next door is Mr. Tang's house." Tang Ji recalled it carefully. "According to the topography and layout of the two houses, isn't the courtyard adjacent to that kid's back house?" "No," Tang Ji strode in and said, "I live in this courtyard, Yao Yao, you go live in the other side." "I'm not going," Tang Yao Yao raised her head and said, "I have packed everything and I don't want to pack it again." Tang Ji wanted to say something more, but she pushed him out. "I'm going to bed. Call me again during dinner," Tang Yao Yao said and closed the door directly. She walked back to her room, thinking of the conversation between father and daughter in the room just now. The expression on her face was a little shy and angry. After being shy and angry, she became confused again. Xiu looked at her and asked curiously, "Miss, what's wrong with you?" She covered her head with a quilt, lay on the bed, and said, "Don't bother me, let me sleep for a while." Outside the hospital, Shopkeeper Su looked at rich man Tang and asked, "Shopkeeper, you brought so many people to Beijing this time, are you not planning to go back?" Tang Ji sighed and said, "Who allowed me to give birth to such a good daughter?" What Tang Ning and Xiao Ju said was responded to the next day. Although there is a saying that officials do not compete with the people for profit, how many officials and dignitaries in the capital really do not get involved in business? It's nothing more than taking a few more detours and handing over your property to a housekeeper or a relative to take care of it. Lu Jun had just followed Xiao Ju in and couldn't help but said, "Brother Tang, when it comes to making money, you are the best. Whatever you say, we will do it." Mu Yu also looked regretful and said, "If we had been willing to buy with you during the imperial examination, we would not have to worry about spending money now." The Lu family, the Huang family and the Mu family were all the sunset families in the capital. They were once prominent, but with the decline of the family, their influence was no longer what it used to be. Of course, even if it is in decline, the wealthy family is still a wealthy family and still has a deep heritage. However, Lu Jun and others are only the younger generation of the family. Compared with ordinary people, their daily income is naturally astronomical, but if it is compared with Tang dynasty compared with the rich generation like Yao Yao, they are even shabbier than beggars. Their meager pocket money is far from enough for their daily consumption. Tang Ning smiled and said, "Xiao Ju should have told you about the specific matter, right?" Lu Jun nodded and said, "He has already made it very clear. We all listen to Brother Tang on this matter. I should be able to come up with 1,000 taels, which means a few less meals and a few less sleeps in the past 2 months. Girls' things." Huang Yulong thought for a while and said, I can also take out 1,000 taels. Mu Yu smiled and said, then I'll pay 1,000 taels. Gu Bai is not here, so I promised him first and he will pay 1,000 taels. Xiao Ju looked at Tang Ning and said, I will pay 5,000 taels. During the provincial examination, Xiao Zhao took a gamble. Naturally, his current net worth is not comparable to that of Lu Jun and others. Tang Ning already has nearly 10,000 taels of startup capital before she even deposits any money. Even if you open a big bookshop in a place like Dongxi where land is precious, you won't need so much silver. But there is always no harm in having more money. With enough money, you can build a larger workshop. Please update. With more craftsmen, the speed of typesetting and printing will be greatly accelerated. Tang Ning made arrangements for the branching of stores the next day. In order to open a bookshop in the shortest time, Tang Yaoyao's method is worth learning from. He simply bought several adjacent shops, opened them up, renovated them, and put up the Tang Grenzai brand. That's it. With Tang Grenzai's current influence in the bookstore circle, it doesn't even need much early publicity. The three words Tang Grenzai are the biggest golden signboard. Of course, money is indispensable for good publicity. If you want to be famous as the Tang Grenzai Dongcheng branch, you still need something a little different. The sales volume of the bookstore shows that in addition to romantic stories such as The Romance of the West Chamber and The Peony Pavilion, books with strong mysterious colors are also very popular. The Palace of Eternal Life is the best-selling one recently. Judging from the trend, the preferences of the rich ladies of the capital seem to be changing from classical romance to fairy tale romance. There must be love, family affection, and an unbridled imagination. It is best to have something to do with immortal magic and the like. He has already written The Legend of the White Snake and is revising The Lotus Lantern. By then, not only will he be able to earn tears, but he will also be able to earn money. He had already shown it to Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi. The two women were so moved that they couldn't stop crying. The result was that he didn't even go to anyone's bed last night and slept alone in the study. Before printing, he had to show it to Tang Yaoyao. After all, in addition to him as the boss, the bookshop also had Tang Yaoyao, the proprietress, and she had the right to know anything about the bookshop. I don't know if Tang Keshan is at home, but Tang Ning discovered it when she was in Lingzhou. Tang Yaoyao's father didn't seem to like him very much, and she didn't know why. He didn't want to do anything that would cause trouble. After thinking about it, he took the manuscript and easily climbed over the courtyard wall. Yeah, the little maid Xiu who was standing in the yard was startled. After seeing that it was him who fell from the sky, she patted her chest and felt relieved. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Is Yao Yao at home?" Xiu shook her head and said, "The lady said that if you come, just say she is not here." Tang Ning glanced at Tang Yao Yao's room. She didn't know what she was sulking about. If she didn't want to see him, just leave. He put the manuscript in his hand on the table and said, "Just remember to give this to her. I'll gone." After that, he climbed over the courtyard wall again. Judging from the fluency in climbing over the wall, Tang Ning felt that his martial arts progress during this period was very obvious. In the afternoon, when he was revising Baolian Lantern in the study, Tang Yaoyao walked in from the outside and put the manuscript on the table. His eyes were a little red and swollen, and he said dissatisfied, "Why do you always write these things that make girls cry, thing? Facts have proved that only by making these wealthy ladies in the capital shed tears can they earn their money." But Tang Ning didn't plan to talk to Tang Yaoyao now, who asked her to pretend that she wasn't there in the morning. Who is not a little princess, who does not have a little temper? He didn't even raise his head or look at her, and continued to revise the manuscript. Tang Yaoyao looked at him and asked, "Are you mute?" Tang Ning glanced at her this time, but still said nothing. Tang Yaoyao looked at him and said angrily, "Okay, just don't say anything, right? If you have the ability, never say anything." Tang Ning instinctively felt that Tang Yejiao's mood was not quite right these past 2 days. Although she had been inexplicable in the past, she had never been so unreasonable. At this time, you can't be angry with her. He glanced at Tang Yaoyao and said, "Whatever you think, I don't think us mortals are worthy of talking to a fairy like you." Tang Yaoyao was startled, lowered his head and asked, "Are you angry with me for not seeing you in the morning?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Why didn't you see me in the morning?" Tang Yaoyao looked at him for a long time, then suddenly put her arms around his shoulders and said, "Tang Ning, remember, we are good sisters for life." "Who is sharing the same bed with you?" Tang Ning pushed her away in disgust and said, "I thought you drooled while sleeping." Tang Ji and Zhou Mingli walked into the courtyard and said, "I have restrained Yao Yao, you should also restrain your uncle." Zhou Mingli looked at him, "Restrain Yao Yao, will she listen to you? I am her father, how dare she disobey me?" Rich man Tang looked at him, waved his sleeves and said, "Then stay in the room, I'll discuss something with him." He strode into the room. In the study, Tang Yaoyao pressed Tang Ning on the bed, straddled him, and said angrily, "You dare to say that I drooled while sleeping? Believe it or not, I beat you to the point where you drool." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 241. Tang Ning was a little embarrassed and a little depressed. One of them was the top leader of Jing County, and the other was a wealthy businessman. Didn't they know the principle of knocking on the door before entering someone else's room? Being ridden on by a woman again and again, he, a top scholar, really couldn't afford to lose face. Tang Ji's face turned black again. He looked at Tang Yaoyao and said in a deep voice, "Get out." Tang Yaoyao got off Tang Ning and followed him out. Bookmark this site. Zhou Mingli stayed in the room, looked at Tang Ning, sighed and said, "Although you have a good relationship, there are differences between men and women. You should be careful when you laugh and play." Tang Ning was helpless and a little sad. He didn't want to be ridden by a woman all the time. He also wanted to turn over and make the decision, but turning over also depends on the object. Judging from Tang Yaoyao's martial arts value, he should not be able to turn over in front of Tang Yejing for a long time. Unless he is not so naughty. But if you can't be naughty whenever you want, what is the meaning of life? In the pavilion in the courtyard, Tang Ji looked at Tang Yaoyao and asked, "Last time it was on the grass, this time it's on the bed, where are you going next time?" Tang Yaoyao said calmly, "You misunderstood." Tang Ji raised his eyebrows and asked, "He said you like to drool when you sleep, is it also a misunderstanding?" Tang Yaoyao explained, "That was when I accidentally fell asleep in his room that time." Tang Ji glanced at her and said, "Even if it's a misunderstanding, will others think it's a misunderstanding? A single man and a single woman, sharing a bed, others will only think you are having sex. If Xiaoi sees it, how will you explain it?" Tang Yaoyao thought for a while and said, "I will pay attention in the future." "I'm glad you understand." Tang Ji nodded with satisfaction and said, "Come in, I have something to discuss with you too." Tang Ning looked at the rich man Tang calmly, and Tang Ji also looked at him calmly. After a while, Tang Ji finally asked, "I heard from shopkeeper Su that the Tang Grenzai in the capital was opened by you too." "I don't know what he said to Tang Yaoyao outside just now. It's obvious that he doesn't intend to care about what happened just now." Tang Ning nodded and said, "We opened it together. I have something to discuss with you." Tang Ji looked at him and said, "I plan to open some new stores in the capital. When the time comes, I hope to insert a page of store information after your book to promote it." Tang Ning glanced at the rich man Tang. He was able to build such a large family business in the Tang family in more than 10 years. This rich man Tang's vision is indeed extraordinary. The sales of Tang Grenzai's novels in the capital are extremely hot. If advertisements are inserted in the book, I don't know how many people will see it every day. This is almost the best way to promote. They don't need to invest almost anything. Just one page of advertisements, and then wait for customers to come. Compared to sending people to distribute flyers and post notices on the street, this method is simple and fast, turning passive into active, and can achieve good results in a short time. Even Tang Ning herself hadn't thought about the fact that advertising fees were a huge sum of money. If the business was run well, the profits would even exceed the novel itself. However, Mr. Tang was Tang Yejing's father after all, so he couldn't talk to him about money. Seeing his expression, it seemed that he had no intention of giving money. Tang Ning thought about it, but before she could speak, Tang Yao Yao's voice came over. "Give me money." Tang Yao Yao looked at Mr. Tang and said, "I charge by the number of articles, 1,000 taels per article, no more than 10 articles per page, and one article can be given for free if you package the pages." "Give me money." Mr. Tang stared at her with wide eyes. "You ask me for money, but I'm your father." Tang Yao Yao said righteously, "This is not my business alone. If I don't ask you for money just because you are my father, how can I explain it to others?" "Others?" Mr. Tang looked at Tang Ning and said, "Tang boy, are you going to take my money?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "I think what Yao Yao said makes sense." Mr. Tang's face was filled with anger. He stood up and said angrily, "It's not enough that you cheated my daughter, and now you want my money." Sure enough, the richer people are, the more stingy they become. Mr. Tang is clearly planning to make money without doing anything. What does it mean to cheat her daughter? Although Tang Yejing is a little bit of a demon, she is also very smart. Who can cheat her? If she is not smart, how can she collect money from her own father? Let's put it in a different way. Tang Yao Yao looked at the rich man Tang and said, "This is what you taught me, Dad. Doing business should be done in a business manner. There is no father and son in the business world. Of course, you are my father, I will give you a discount. If it were someone else, it would be 2,000 taels apiece. Although it is said that girls should not be kept when they grow up, but I have never seen an elbow turn outward so quickly." The rich man Tang stood up and gritted his teeth and said, "Okay, okay, okay, 1,000 taels is 1,000 taels." The rich man Tang left without drinking a sip of tea, and he was a little angry when he left. Tang Ning didn't know why he was angry. He obviously got a big advantage. One page saved several thousand taels of silver compared to others. What else is there to be angry about? Apart from anything else, this time, Tang Yao Yao, who put justice above relatives and distinguished between public and private, really made him look at him with new eyes. Tang Ning looked at her and said seriously, "Oh my God, from now on, our family business will be in your hands." July was approaching, and he would have to start work at the Hanlin Academy by early August at the latest. By then, he would definitely not be as free as he is now, and naturally he would not have the time to take care of business matters. At this time, a reliable business partner is particularly important. Tang Yejing even handles business affairs with his own father, and is a good and trustworthy partner. By the way, there is one more thing. Tang Ning looked at her and said, "If you have anything to say in the future, can you please talk to me carefully? Don't go to bed easily." In recent days, Tang Renzai's reputation in the capital has spread rapidly. The popularity of he produced by Tang Renzai is no less than that of he a few days ago. It is especially popular among the rich ladies of the capital and other ladies. Tang Renzai is in the west area of the capital, and most of the dignitaries in the capital gather in the west area. If you want to buy the latest volume, you have to go through the entire capital. Every time the new volume goes on sale, the servants of those wealthy families, and even there were people who lined up the night before. The opening of Tang Renzai branch a few days ago has completely solved this problem. The Tang Renzai branch is a merger of several stores on the busiest street in the east city of Beijing. It was officially opened a few days ago. Today is the day when new books go on sale, and people lined up at the door early. In line with the principle that the products produced by Tang Grenzai must be high quality, even if they have not seen the content of the book, but only saw the author of the book, the never-before-seen talented woman Tang Ningning, they have no doubts about the quality of the content. The name of the book this time is just by listening to the name, you can tell that this must be another mysterious story about demons, and gods. You didn't read the promotion a few days ago. This time it's about the love between a human and a demon. It's said that the woman in the book is a snake spirit who has been practicing for thousands of years. Then Su Xian is really a beast, he doesn't even let go of snakes. What does this mean? A while ago, weren't there people who didn't even let ghosts go? Listening to what you said, I really want to know how this man and the snake, you understand. A restaurant opposite Tang Grenzai, a table by the window on the second floor. Lu Jun looked at the long queue below and said with a smile, I knew that if I followed Brother Tang, I wouldn't suffer any loss. I've read this story in Tang Grenzai, but I don't think it's anything special. Huang Yulong shook his head and said, it seems to be about an old monk breaking up a pair of lovers and a demon. Years later, their son was admitted to the top exam, saved his parents, and reunited his family. Do so many people really like to read this story? You don't understand. The ladies of the capital like this tune. Gu Bai took a sip of wine and suddenly said, why does this story sound so familiar?